Hello, everyone. This time it's an interview in English, so you will find the translation below. But we'll have to ask the question to our guest today in English because we have with us Thomas Fazi, independent journalist working for A Nerd. Hello, Thomas.
Hi. Thanks for having us on the show.
Thank you for being here. And Pascal Clairot, who's French, but going to speak in English like me, independent journalist as well for L'Éclaireur. Hello, Pascal.
Hey, Alexis. Thanks for having us.
And I wanted to have you both because you've just made a special report, very thorough, more than 50 page, and the industrial censorship complex in France, the Twitter files, France. Basically, your findings are quite amazing. Emmanuel Macron has one priority. It is to censor the social network in France, especially Twitter at the time. Can you briefly explain what is in this report and why it is important that we speak about this report so that the French people understand where they stand?
Go ahead.
Yeah, you want to start, Pascal? No, feel free to start.
First thing to say is that this predates Emmanuel Macron. When it comes to social networks and the internet, we do see that the obsession for censorship started with François Hollande. We do have our press articles and a declaration from Najat Vallaud-Belkacem. Damn, Michael is calling me.
Michael is also the journalist you work with.
Hey, we're on an interview with Thomas. Unless you want to join the interview, of course, which we're doing in English, by the way.
You can send the link to Michael. He's
speakerphone.
He can join. That will be a pleasure. Michael is the journalist you work with as well. Okay.
Yeah.
The Socialist Party. So what you're saying is that the Socialist Party with Hollande, while he was president of the Republic, was starting this censorship policy in France, right?
Yes, we do see, for instance, Najat Vallaud-Belkacem advocating and demanding for debunking on social networks in 2013 already. So this is nothing new. And it is indeed, this whole compulsion for speech control is something which is to be found much more on the left than the right, indeed.
Mm. You see, I mean, in this report, what is very interesting is that you show that there is a complex. As you said, of course, the state is working on this, but NGOs, the ONG, are also part of the censorship complex. And you mentioned people like SOS Racisme, SOS Homophobie, and others as also working hand in hand with the states to push some agenda in censoring the social network.
Yes. Yes, I think what's interesting about the French censorship industrial complex that we describe in the report is that in many respects it really predates and anticipates what has become the model for censorship today, especially online censorship, which is censorship by proxy, and more specifically censorship by NGO proxy. So of course, no government, no state wants to be seen as directly censoring critical voices, dissident voices on social media for obvious reasons. In many countries, that's actually illegal, including in France. You know, France has pretty strong laws upholding free speech, and that effectively outlawing the French state from directly censoring and directly intervening on sort of controlling the public debate sphere. And so what France sort of, you could say, really in many ways invented this model that was exported and sort of became the model for censorship today across the West, is sort of subcontracting censorship to NGOs. In many cases, progressive aligned, left aligned NGOs. Many of these NGOs, some of which you mentioned already, have ties to the state, in one form or another. And so the idea was, we won't, especially once the issue of social media started becoming sort of a problem from the perspective of sort of established elites, the question then became, how do we get these platforms to take down content that we don't like? And what they did was essentially, okay, we'll subcontract these demands for censorship to NGOs. Now, the extent to which this sort of the relationship between the NGOs and the state is organic, I think that that depends on a case-to-case basis. In some cases it's probably quite very organic. In other cases it's probably well-intentioned progressive just being exploited by the state. But the question is, that ultimately these NGOs are used directly or indirectly to censor unwelcome information. And I think it's interesting, but also not coincidental, that France was the country to kind of come up with this model, because in a way I've always been fascinated by the French political system, which is a system that in a way it prides itself on being a model democracy, liberté, égalité, and all that stuff. But at the same time, as we know, it's also a very oligarchic system. It's a system where who gets to the top of the political system is ultimately determined by a very sort of tight pipeline. So there's a very tight selection at the at the base of the pyramid. So it's done through elite schools and whatnot. And so I think that France has always had to navigate this contradiction of on paper being this ideal democracy, one of the greatest democracies in the world, while at the same time having a system where in fact the economic and political oligarchies have always exercised a very tight control over the political decision-making process. And so it makes sense that one way to sort of navigate this contradiction is to increasingly sort of sublet censorship to third parties. So in a way, you're still controlling that information sphere, while at the same time maintaining that you have nothing to do with it. And and I think that's now that's the problem facing Western elites all over, all over Europe and beyond. And so that it makes sense that they would now be sort of adopting that model.
And what we see is that there is a link between the politicians and the NGOs. I mean, you have a list of these people saying the French censorship leaders, and we find Aurore Berger, of course, Thierry Breton, who was a European Commissioner, Raphaël Glucksmann, who was a member of the European Parliament, Najat Vallaud-Belkacem, we talked about her, and now she's a member of the Cour des Comptes in Paris. Of course, we have then people whose job is the protection of the people against conspiracies and fake news. Rudy Reichstadt, Tristan Mendes France, Thomas Huchon, part of Conspiracy Watch, but also David Chavalerias, who was a part of CNRS and who made the Quit X movement to say that X, since it was bought by Elon Musk, was dangerous and people had to leave. And of course, the ARCOM, was looking at online and TV radio content, Viginum, Conspiracy Watch, as I said, and the NGO, Union des États Juifs de France, SOS Racisme, and other trusted flaggers from the DSA, the CRIF, la Fédération des centres LGBT, la LICRA, Mandorpa, le Mouvement d'Uni, Oser le féminisme, Planning familial, etc., etc. What we can see is that it's a very complex system with many people involved. Why is it so big in terms of people, and why is it so small? Because what we see is that clearly there is one political aim to this. It's not just protecting people against hate speech and fake news.
Well, it's a question of core business. That's a question of fond de commerce, as we say, which is, of course, segmented towards very specific audiences with very specific concerns, community-based, etc., etc., etc. But most importantly, the NGO is the key actor in any industrial censorship complex. I mean, whether in France, in the US, I mean, this is a pattern we've seen all over the world. Why is that? Because the NGO enable the states to do what the state cannot do in a circuitous and oblique way. So it's a proxy, basically. It's censorship by proxy. That's what it is. Since the 1972 Pleven Law in France, which gave two NGOs the power to initiate legal, criminal proceedings in free speech cases, we've seen a multiplication of these type of NGOs, starting from the mid-80s, so starting after François Mitterrand and the French Socialist Party betrayed the working and middle class. And that was a way for them. We know, for instance, that SOS Racisme was created at the Élysée Palace. I mean, Jacques Attali, in his book, verbatim, states it. I mean, so we do see this as a very potent political lever, because one, well, who's against the fight against racism and anti-Semitism? No one. Who's against the fight against pedophilia and pedopornography? No one. Okay, etc., etc., etc.
Yeah.
So by taking this type of moral stance, you can leverage negatively this type of postures, and this is precisely what has been done since the mid-80s in France, and this is what has inspired the American left to do so at the turn of the century.
So basically, you're saying that France invented the censorship complex back in the 70s with the Pleven Law, so more than 50 years ago, and since then it's been a model even for the Democrats in the US, and we've learned because new technology came on the way, and it became bigger and bigger, basically.
You see wokism, which is stemming from the French theory, you know, Foucault, Deleuze, Derrida, and the likes.
French school.
Well, listen, that's straight back to us 30 years after. They did exactly the same with the censorship industrial complex. France has always been a very important experimental ground for the Americans, because we're not part of NATO. So they had to find, I mean, other ways to influence people. And keep in mind that the modern, also the modern humanitarian NGO is also a French invention from the 1970s with MSF.
Yeah, of course. Yes.
Before that, you had the Red Cross, well, the International Red Cross Committee, and you had UN agencies or missionaries. That was it.
And you say in the report as well that back in 1968, the movement in France, Mai 68, was also kind of formed by these kind of NGOs, US funded and based. The idea was to fight de Gaulle, who was a danger for NATO, basically.
Thomas?
Yes, I mean, basically what the US adopted a very, very skillful strategy beginning in the 60s, and then I would say, you know, moving into the 70s and even the 80s. The US had a big problem, which was the strength of the old left in Europe, you know, especially in countries like France, but not only. And this was, you know, a left that was very much focused on sort of, you know, had a class-based analysis and looked, you know, in many cases looked positively at the Soviet model. That was, you know, and was strongly anti-American, you know, and so from the US perspective of, okay, you know, how can we culturally dominate this continent, which in many respects has such a different cultural and political ecosystem from America's. We have to deal with the problem of the left, but of course we can't just, this isn't Latin America, so we can't just impose military dictatorships and round up all the leftists. So what they did, essentially the strategy they adopted is, okay, what about if we change the left from within? How about if we move the left away from sort of, you know, a focus on anti-imperialism, anti-Americanism, on class, and we move them towards issues like, you know, gender and identity and this kind of stuff, you know. And then, of course, we know that this is, when one thinks of the left today, this is what you think of, you know, this kind of, you know, progressive.
And the European values, the progressive values, democracy.
Exactly. and all that stuff. I mean, it's important to recognize that that stuff was not part of the baggage of the old left. The old left, you know, had a completely different worldview. But the US very skillful in, and by the US, I mean the US deep state was very skillful in providing support to this new wave of left thinkers. So, you know, all the post-structure, you know, the French post-structuralists were at the forefront of this move, and we know that a lot of them were directly financed by the CIA. A lot of their magazines were financed by the CIA, but you had similar operations in place in other countries, which is why today the left has essentially become, you know, an extension of the establishment, because it largely, this new left is largely a creation of the establishment, and specifically of the US deep state, which is why it proves so useful and continues to prove very, very, very useful as a proxy, as we were saying.
So even the left, François Mitterrand, who took power in '81, was part of this new left in many ways.
Yes, of course. If you think that Mitterrand was elected without, with communists in his first government, without the approval of the US during the Cold War, well, I mean, please say no to drugs. I mean, he was. But most strikingly, what did make France very specific when compared to the two other countries where the Communist Party was very strong, that's Italy, of course, and that gave unity the late years, and Greece, that gave them the civil war, and then the colonial dictatorship, is that in France, the resistance was unified, and the right wing of the resistance never fought the left wing of the resistance, including the communists. So that was something fairly unique. So, and when de Gaulle came back in 1958 in power, that was kind of, it was the party of the resistance that came back, and keeping also in mind that both the Gaullists and the communists did vote against the CED, or the European Defense Community, which was planning on reintegrating a rearmed Germany within a single European military establishment, which paved the way to NATO, and which, by the way, did originate from something called Le Plan Pleven, which is the same guy to which we owe La Loi Pleven.
About censorship, basically the cornerstone of the censorship complex. Yeah. But Pleven was a part of the resistance, so that's kind of tricky, right?
Yeah, but he was already, he was with de Gaulle in 1914 in London. He's been instrumental to the French African colonies joining back the Free French. And keep in mind that the headquarters of the Free French forces was Brazzaville, was not London. I'm talking about the military here. And Pleven in 1944 created a political party called the UDSR, Union of Democrats and Socialists of the Resistance, that François Mitterrand took over in 1953. At 22. So René Pleven, radical socialist, you know, rat sauce, rat sauce.
And it's quite interesting because we have these new leaders like Gabriel Attal, who have been basically went to school from transatlantic schools, like Young Leaders Program from Davos, Bilderberg clubs and stuff like that. And though these guys are pretending to defend France and Europe and blah, 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 but they want basically to ditch all the heritage from the CNR, from the resistance, saying that the world have changed, it's time to move on, we can't do like we used to do in the past. And if you look at European countries, most of these countries are suffering from these elites who are basically cast by the transatlantic clubs, like the Young Leaders Program, the French-American Foundation, and so on.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, it's you know, we could go on hours talking about the numerous ways in which the US has ensured its strategic control and the strategic subordination of Europe in the post-war era, and it's done that, you know, through a variety of tools. You know, I mean, obviously we have the deep linkages between the US security and national security establishment and the various national security and intelligence apparatuses within European states. Obviously, that's a crucial element. We know that, you know, a lot of these intelligence apparatuses in Europe are effectively under the control of the U.S. intelligence apparatus. Then, of course, we've got the you know, the way they control the public debate, you know, through English language think tanks, through English language newspapers. And of course, the fact. Sorry?
Benjamin Haddad, which is currently France Secretary of State, Under Secretary of State for European Affairs, has been employed his whole career by American think tanks in Washington. I mean, Hudson Institute.
Absolutely. And the fact that, English is effectively the lingua franca in Europe, and especially at the EU level in Brussels, of course, helps a lot. But then you've got the direct grooming of European politicians, basically. And,
it's going further than that, because if we look at Macron, who is at the center of this Twitter Files France report, Emmanuel Macron is the representative of this generation of totally controlled leaders from the deep state. We could say that. His party, as you said in the report, has been created by McKinsey, American consulting firm. Basically, all that he's been doing has been following the plan, and he's been casted by Jacques Attali on La Commission Attali, then went to Davos on the World Economic Forum. And all his policy was basically aligning France with what Washington wanted at the time, what the Democrats wanted at the time. And this is why censorship came back so strong in France because of Macron. Because we could say that from the 70s to Macron, it was not so obvious. It was not so violent, the control of the social network. But with Macron, we are in a very different position. Is that because of his tie with the American elites and state foundation and stuff?
Well, this is the way calls these people Gallo-Ricains, not Gallo-Romans, but Gallo-Ricans. Which is pretty much the case. Quite frankly, if someone else than Macron would have been elected, I don't think there would have been such a difference, as a matter of fact, because we do see that the turning point when it comes to his, legislative frenzy and pertaining to or applied to social network is 2016. Why is that? One, because Barack Obama created the GED, Global Engagement Center, which was a unit of the State Department, which in effect was a censorship machine using techniques, tactics, how do you call that? Methods, sources and methods, as they say at the CIA.
So that was just before the election of Trump.
That was just before. That was 6 months before. That was during the Republican primary, when it became obvious that Trump by running a very aggressive anti-establishment campaign, would win the Republican nomination. And also, one aspect that aggravated all this was the Brexit.
Brexit, of course, because
so they went to bananas with that, and this is why we're seeing the legislative agenda. Being pushed through the pipeline, and this is also why we're seeing increasingly this type of agenda, which originally was meant to be pushed at state-by-state level because it's constitutional, being pushed at an EU level.
And so basically, Obama is at the center of this rebirth of the ultra control of the social network and stuff, because the Democrats knew that Trump could win, and they wanted to protect themselves.
Yes, I think, again, one shouldn't focus too much on individual political leaders. These are usually figureheads. I think we have to look at it in a wider structural context. And of course, Obama happened to be the president at a time when the elites started freaking out about the impact of social media. It's important to remember that the second half of the 2010s was an incredibly tumultuous moment in Western politics. We had this was the first real populist wave, anti-establishment wave in a very long time. And Pascal mentioned Brexit. obviously, the Trump election and Trump, winning the primary before that. But you had, the yellow vests protests in France. I mean, shit was kicking off all over the place. Then, of course, on top of that, let's not forget another very important element, which is the US-backed coup in Ukraine in 2014, which effectively kickstarts that war, which we are still, which is still raging on, but that war effectively started in 2014 when we essentially overthrew the democratically elected government in Ukraine, and that's when you see within NATO circles a heightened attention on the and focus on the issue of what they call cognitive warfare. And the idea was, okay, we've got this operation going on in Ukraine, and it's really important for us that, to have Western support, the support of the Western public for what is happening in Ukraine. So that means not only running propaganda and censorship operations within Ukraine through USAID, which now, thanks to Trump, we know was, most of the Ukrainian independent media and independent NGOs were effectively funded by USAID and similar US agencies. But the idea was we have to employ similar propaganda / censorship operations in the West as well. And so essentially these tools that were developed initially in military thinking and military strategy to target foreign enemies and foreign populations are redirected towards Western audiences. And so NATO is central to all this. I mean, France, while it was passing all these laws and implementing all this censorship, was definitely also very much in dialogue with NATO. NATO, of course, being a key link to the to the transatlantic deep state. Let's put it that way, and that's so that's a key element to understanding all of this.
That's why we've seen the latest was the presidential election in Romania, where France had a key role in controlling the narrative, cancelling the first election. Basically, France was key in playing with the Romanian people so that they won't elect Călin Gorgescu.
Well, let's be clear about one thing. I mean, we saw France was at the forefront. Now there is one more country that, as a matter of made it stronger, but by other means, and that's Germany. We should not forget our dear friends from the other side of the Rhine. So Macron, took the lead officially, but just like in Ukraine, by the way, keep in mind that it's before François Hollande in 2012, I believe, struck a deal with Germany, whereby he outsourced all intelligence to the Germans in Ukraine, and we were passing them on intelligence about the side which the Germans don't give a damn about. So that was pretty smart too. And then when shit hit the fan in Ukraine, oh, we don't have any captor, we don't have any sensors. Yeah, well, go figure. So yeah, but damn, I've lost. J'ai perdu mon film.
About France in Romania, but not only France.
Yeah, about Romania. Yeah, but no, it is a coordinated. Romania was clearly a coordinated action on the EU side, but we do see that the European Commission lacks any form of clout in this type of things. I mean, besides paying for NGOs, but then again, it doesn't work any longer. Okay, so this whole cognitive security, cognitive warfare mumbo jumbo turns out to be as successful as state building, in the 2000s.
Yeah, but
a miserable failure.
Yeah, I mean, it's obvious what they're doing. No, they don't even try to hide it or to do it behind doors. Clearly, they show that they want to control the narrative on social networks. We have the DSA with Thierry Breton in Europe. In France, Pavel Durov, founder of Telegram, was arrested last summer by the French authorities on the ground of pedocriminality and not controlling enough what was going on Telegram. Now we have chat control, the new bill that is going to be discussed on the European Parliament to end encryption. Basically, they are really going full speed, and it seems that the agenda is going very fast. Why is such a rush by the censors?
Well, I think partly because they're realizing that all these efforts at censorship and propaganda aren't working out that well for them. Just look at, collapsing public support for political elites in Europe. look at the rise of populist movements, across Europe, movements and parties. Clearly, despite all the money and all the efforts that they've thrown at controlling the narrative, it's not working. Or at least it's working that they're getting declining returns from all this investment. People don't trust of course, we know that people don't trust the mainstream media anymore, the established media, but people are becoming also, I think, more and more aware of how information is also manipulated on social networks. People are becoming more and more aware of this. So in a way, you could say that, it's a vicious circle that I don't think will work out very well for the elites, because they realize that, okay, people aren't buying it, so we have to double down on the censorship. We have to come up with new tools. We have to be increasingly and more heavy-handed. But of course, that just makes the censorship more and more obvious to everyone, making it less and less effective. So, and I think the fact that they're guessing, that this is working less and less is the reason why they're not limiting themselves to what were the old tools. So propaganda, censorship, sort of soft tools that they've always used to manage democracy. But increasingly, they're feeling compelled to intervene in sort of even the formal structures of electoral democracy. And again, we have to return to Romania, where they literally overturned an election because the wrong guy won. I mean, this is how desperate they are. Despite, again, even in Romania, there wasn't, the propaganda, all the mainstream media was, aligned against Georgescu. In fact, he wasn't, even considered in the mainstream media. But we know that there were a lot of covert efforts as well. Romania has been the target of a lot of censorship and propaganda efforts, both by the EU and also by the US in recent years, because it's a key geostrategic country on the border with Ukraine.
Of NATO base, and
it's a very important NATO base. Focusing a lot of efforts on Romania, which didn't work, which is why in the end they had to literally redo the election and ban the candidate who had won from running in the second round of the election.
But yet it works. The Romanians haven't overthrown the election, and basically they said, okay, fine, we'll play with these rules, so they can go even further. My fear is that basically they say, okay, we've been trying to say, oh, we defend democracy, we defend freedom, but in the end, you don't care. So let's go full speed on a European technocracy that will be authoritarian, and you'll be happy.
Well, what the establishment is getting really scared about is the fact that in the whole of Eastern Europe, not only in Romania, these people are still have the memory of communism. And when you take a look at how the EU works, well, it's the USSR. Okay, and this is something I've been hearing. In former Yugoslavia, in Romania, in Czechoslovakia, in Hungary, in Poland, especially when you get out of the city and of very establishment or bourgeois or upper middle class circles, this is something you've always heard. Now Romanians have other things to do. Like all people, they do see a decrease in purchasing power. Life is getting harder. And you have this huge divide between cities and rural Romania. Same thing that we have in France, by the way. It's going to wake up, whether like it or not. I don't think they'll be able to pull that trick twice, quite frankly. We'll see how it fares in Moldova on the 16th. Because there are general elections, I believe, and we saw huge amount of cash being pushed through what is a mafia state of the like of Ukraine. Let's face it, Moldova. Well, not of the size, because that's how much, 2.5 million inhabitants. It's not 32 million like Ukraine was.
But how?
I don't think it's going to work. I don't think it's going to work. So
how does it go with Ukraine? Clearly now it's obvious that European leaders like Macron, Starmer, Merz, they all exist because of Ukraine. No, their main goal is to push so that we have to go to a European war and make sure that there will be the leaders and stay. They don't want peace in Ukraine. I mean, that's quite obvious. Can it work with Donald Trump, who's basically saying, okay, as long as you buy, U.S. weapon, do your shit, or can we stop this?
Well, yes. I mean, I think first of all, it's important to understand that a lot of these leaders that you mentioned were probably to some degree, maneuvered into power by the U.S. precisely because the Ukraine war had to be kept going. Italy's case is really interesting. I mean, in Italy, they actually brought Mario Draghi in just before Russia's, just after Russia's invasion of Ukraine. So, I think that tells they needed to have a leader they could count on in place in a crucial country like Italy. I think the same goes for a number of European countries. So in a way, you could say that European leaders have been acting effectively as proxies. We've spoken a lot about proxies today, but European leaders are also proxies of the US deep state. And so the question is, what's going on now? With Trump coming along, and now you've got all this talk of the EU versus Trump, and I wouldn't read too much. I think that's an exaggeration. This idea of a Europe-US rift. I think to a large degree, it's important to realize that not all decisions are taken in the White House in the US. We've been talking about the deep state, and yes, Trump has said, he wanted to wage war on the deep state, but as we're seeing, that is harder to do than one may think. And so, I think those apparatuses of power are still very much putting the strings behind the scenes, and to a large degree, I think coordinating also with Europe. And I think what we're witnessing with Trump and Ukraine is Trump kind of throwing in the towel and just saying, okay, I can't stop this. Even assuming that he ever wanted to stop this war, he's just throwing the towel in and saying, okay, these forces are too powerful. He's essentially dealing with an incredibly powerful war party, which is still very powerful in America and is still in power in Europe. And he's essentially saying, yes, do whatever you want so long as you buy US weapons. And I think that's a solution that's a compromise that works well both for Trump and for the U.S. war party. Just keep the war going a little longer while we can concentrate on other, theaters of war. Because they know that at some point the war is going to come to an end. But of course, you want to keep the grift going as long as you can.
You make money, billions out of war, Iraq, Afghanistan, and the rest. And now the Department of Defense is now called Department of War. And Pete Exit, the Secretary of State for War, said that the U.S. was in the business for war, basically. So
but you don't see them. I mean, there is far less aggressiveness than during the Obama war years. I mean, or even the Biden years, far less. And when it comes to Ukraine, well, I mean, European leaders, they went too far. They just can't walk back. I mean, they've lost it.
But they want to go even further. I mean, Macron wants to send troops.
Well, that's just because this is posturing. I mean, you can't wage a war without public opinion buying. I mean, it's just not possible. And there is
it takes time.
There is no buying from public opinion in Europe for war. Everybody understood it was done. And it was cooked, and everyone, I mean, we all understood that this was a scam, basically. And so basically what people are doing all throughout Europe is just waiting for the next elections to kick these people out. And they know.
But not just that. I think it's important to realize that the specter of the Russian threat is crucial for European leaders to continue implementing these censorship policies. I mean, what is the threat that's always conjured to justify these policies? Russia. We've seen it in the cancellation of the Romanian election. We heard it today in von der Leyen's speech, justifying the need for new tools to counter foreign disinformation and foreign propaganda. I mean, without the Russian threat, the main justification that they have for these increasingly authoritarian policies and for effectively, clamping down on democracy and on people's freedoms would disappear. They can't make peace with Russia because they need Russia is the key thing keeping them in power and justifying their grip on power.
What is amazing is that they always talk about foreign interference, but they never talk about US interference or Israel interference. Basically, it's only Russian, Chinese, Algerian in case of France. But when you come to our leaders, they're all, in one way or another, linked to the US business machine. And it's obvious, especially with Macron, who sold some assets to American companies, and we've been doing anti-France policies for years.
Well, but then again, they won't going to bite the hand that feeds them. They will not do it, and that's the reason why also they are in full disarray. Because with Trump election, well, for starters, they thought that Trump would never be reelected in 2024. They were wrong, and then when he was elected, they thought, okay, then the same thing is going to happen to him then during his first term, which did not happen because Trump just went full speed ahead, blasting his way and doing what actually he's supposed to do, which is politics. Including stuff which are at the limit of the law. Oops, sorry, I just messed up the microphone. So they are, and as we are seeing clearly transatlantic ties fraying, these people feel, well, it's a bit like slaves, you just read and you hate, and I hate you because now they're freed and you don't give them food. It's a bit, I mean,
they have to work to get food.
The nasty surf parable, and they are reacting like that, and they totally lost. They don't understand. They don't understand the United States of America any longer. Well, they thought they understood the US, they never did, and now they don't even understand the whole bloody world. So this is why we're seeing them also falling back on this old Cold War bloc logic, which does not operate in a multipolar world. It's meaningless. I mean, the BRICS is not a bloc. I mean, blocs don't mean anything any longer. So,
and back to Macron.
Sorry.
Yeah, Thomas, go ahead. Yeah.
No, just briefly. I mean, it's not just, of course, the US and Israel exercise huge control over, our political systems, but the main foreign interference into elections in Europe comes from the EU itself. I mean, the EU funds NGOs all across Europe to essentially engage in democracy and to effectively manipulate and sway elections at the tune of hundreds of billions of euros every year. I mean, I wrote another report about this, about the EU NGO complex. And so just going back to the NGOs we were talking about earlier, I mean, it's important to realize that not all NGOs are bad. They're not all, I mean, some NGOs do good work, and including in France, I'm sure. But a lot of the NGOs that I looked at in my report are effectively engaged in a structural relationship with the European Union, with the European Commission. They're effectively fully funded by the European Commission. So I think we should even stop using the term NGOs because they're not, there's no N in that. They're GOs in many cases. I mean, they enjoy a completely structural relationship with the European Commission and, of course, also with many member states. But
so basically, funded by the state, funded by the EU, but they pretend to be non-governmental. They are. And what is really terrible is that we pay with our taxes these people who are then censoring free speech, who are pushing propagandas. How can we control this complex? Is there
cutting the funding, just like Trump did.
Yeah, just like with USAID. But
you need to defund them, and the problem will be pretty easily solved. I mean, what they're doing is turning opinions into facts, which is basically disinformation. And so the day you cut, you just cut. I mean, just take a look at the medias. I mean, come on. Well, for starters, we're not going through. French medias are flush with. I mean, especially the printed press is flush with state subsidies. But just take a look at the European level. What happened right before the 2024 EU elections? I mean, 3 months or 4 months before. Correct me if I'm wrong, Thomas. The EU Commission granted a 123.6 million euros framework contracts to Publicis, all right, for the purchase of advertising space.
No, Bolloré is Havas, publicist.
But no, it's Havas. Then it's not Publicis. Excuse me. It's Havas. Not no. So it's Havas.
Havas then gave the money to newspapers. So that's another way.
Yes, informal advertising. 123.6 million. Yeah. Do you? Yeah. I mean, just to tell you, just to give a sense of proportion of what it actually means to our viewers. And the advertising revenues of the French public broadcasting system per year is 450 million.
Yeah, it's mad. It's mad.
So not only have they bought NGOs whose function is to turn opinions into facts, but now they are paying. They are paying basically. They are buying the media, which are supposed to verify the facts. So it's 1984.
Talking about 1984, have you seen what happened recently in France, where two journalists from the public service, the information, France Info and France Inter, Thomas Legrand and Patrick Cohen, were talking with some socialist leaders about endorsing Raphael Glucksmann if he was running for 2027. And basically, it's, again, obvious in the full daylight, and the defense was that, okay, we talk with people, but it's okay, we're not really doing anything. And if you look about their career and the way they act, basically they've been doing propaganda for the Socialist Party for years, and it's still going on.
It's always been like that. I mean, if you take a look at French history, the French press always been very ideological, very militant. But that's okay. As long as you've got pluralism on, that's quite all right. But we're now with a public broadcasting system which has become a monster. 10 national TV channels. Why on earth do we need that? 8 national radio channels, 44 local radio channels. 44 local radios, I will defend that. That's really important. But 10 TV channels. This is the largest media group in the bloody country. 4 billion euros budget. TF1, which is France's largest TV group or TV network. After France Télévisions, posted revenue in 2024, I believe, of 2.25 billion, not 4 billion. So this is just madness. Defunding. We need to save money. Good. Defund all this. National one, okay. Bolster and strengthen local TVs, France 3, and the rest cut it out.
Yeah, and it's not just state funding. On top of government funding, you've also got, again, all the funding coming from the European Union. That's the topic of another report, of another study that I did. And the European Commission itself, on top of funding NGOs, also funds the European media to the tune of almost 100 million euros a year, and most of that money goes to press agencies, news agencies. All the major news agencies are involved in countless EU-funded projects. All the public broadcasting systems and channels across Europe receive money from the EU, and countless individual outlets receive money and are involved in all kinds of media projects. Media projects. In many cases, I discovered these, the funding is not even disclosed. So they're literally paid, for example, to promote the EU's cohesion policy, say, specific project just aimed at that, and they'll put up a website dedicated just to that. And nowhere in the website does it say that all those articles praising how good, how great EU funding is. Nowhere does it say that that project was funded by the EU. Of course, so all the stuff that you read, when you open the papers, could literally be projects that are directly funded by the European Union.
Have you seen, Thomas? Have you seen now that the OCCRP is back at the European level, and he's running a project which is about literally, I'm not kidding, turning journalists into cops.
And Thomas and Pascal, basically, your report on these Twitter files, France, and the censorship complex, has it been mentioned by the mainstream media, as we call them.
No, 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 no. No, which is the proof, which is proof in the current context in France, which is the proof that we are hitting bullseyes. That's basically what that is. I think that they are pretty scared what's in there. Well, that's the whole. That's a significant part of the power system that we are unveiling and unraveling here. So since Paris is a very small place where everybody knows everybody, and since I don't see any journalists or any mainstream media going against l'ICRA, MRAP, SOS Racisme, SOS Homophobie, stuff like that. In the same way that very few mainstream medias went against our Le Grand and Cohen, you saw basically more or less.
They've been. I mean, it was normal. You know, the great journalists defend them. You know, you can't say that. You want to destroy free press in France. That's what we heard basically. But what's interesting that one journalist from BFM, Raphaël Grabli, mentioned your report on X and said that there was nothing new, nothing to see here.
Oh, but him is well, the Grabli.
Yeah, that's another classic strategy. You know, that's another classic strategy. You know, you either ignore or you can minimize. Like, it's no big deal. You know,
no big deal.
It's no big deal. Yeah, we knew about all this beforehand. Yeah, but I think the reaction to the report really exemplified why they're doubling down on the censorship industrial complex. Exactly. Mainstream media completely ignored it. So if we only had that, if only that existed, you wouldn't even know that this report existed. But thanks to social media, where it went immediately viral. I mean, countless tweets, you know, with, you know, tens of thousands of likes and reposts. I mean, it was really huge, and that explains why they're so scared of these tools and of these platforms. And in a way, you know, the reaction to the report, you know, is in a way a confirmation of everything that we say in the report. You know, this is why they're cracking down. You know, because they're not able to control the information flow on these platforms as much as they try.
And all the rational, all the narrative on the control of the speech is basically to protect the users against hate speech, illegal contents and stuff. But if you look at the demand of censorship, most of them were politically based, basically to censor some voices, opinions.
They're protecting themselves. That's all. I mean, establishments have a vested interest in entrenching their privileges, and bureaucracies have for only goals, I mean, self-preservation and growth. So yeah, it's perfectly logic, and we do see now, if you take a look at the actual financial situation of all 24 hours news channels in France, it's catastrophic. I mean, they're all losing tons of money. Take a look at the press. I'm not even mentioning it, even though they're subsidized up to 1/3 of their yearly revenues, cost the French taxpayers over 2 billion euros a year. So, I mean, they are, mainstream media are over. I mean,
but yeah, I mean, there should be no doubt. There should be no doubt whatsoever that regardless of all the terms they come up with, you know, fighting hate speech, you know, combating disinformation, misinformation, whatever, the ultimate aim is simply censoring voices that are critical of establishment narratives. That is all that this is about. Because if anyone can find me someone who has spread obvious disinformation while being aligned with the orthodox, the mainstream narrative, and has been censored, you know, we'll give them a prize. You know, I mean, there's all sorts of sort of pro-establishment disinformation out there, and even hate speech, which doesn't get censored. I remember, I think it was Twitter, which in 2022 changed its internal hate speech laws to allow for the calling of the killing of Russians. Right? I remember that very clearly.
Facebook.
Was it
Facebook did that?
Facebook,
which is worse than Twitter. Anyway.
So it would be okay to call.
But I mean,
of Russians.
You think that the fact that Elon Musk bought Twitter to launch the Twitter files back to the Democrats in the US changed thing on X, and you think that the new Zuckerberg was no like Trump compatible changed things also on Facebook, or is it just all fake and hypocrisy?
No, I think it did. Well, Zuckerberg, the Zuck, of course, had just turned around. But Musk, I believe, is a bit more dedicated to what he's saying. Yet, he does tend also to mingle a bit in the platform. To what extent is unknown, but it is, no matter what, far better than what it used to be. Mostly because he kicked out the whole censorship team, which was useless. Useless. And
No, I mean, there's no doubt that there's less censorship today on X than there used to be on Twitter. That doesn't mean that there's not any censorship. Is Musk manipulating the algorithm to make everyone see his tweets? Yes, obviously.
If he does that, that's no big deal.
No, I mean,
the only thing he does, it's no big deal.
It's not perfect, but it's
we don't know.
Much freer space than it used to be. And I think the really interesting question, and beyond Musk, I think, is the political dynamics, between the censorship going on in Europe and the demands from the U.S. Administration to support free speech, and they've been very vocal about their criticism of the censorship. Yeah. And again, I think one has to take a nuanced view. I mean, it's great that the U.S. administration is standing up, for free speech, and of course this is my personal view, and Pascal and Michael and others might hold a different view. But I think this whole there's a weaponization of free speech in Europe, but there's also, I think, a political weaponization of the issue of free speech in the US. So in a sense, they're using this issue also to advance certain political goals. And so I think, there's certain types of censorship, which, for example, anti-Palestinian censorship, which I don't think the US administration would be very concerned about. So, there's a selective outrage at European censorship from the US administration, which we have to be aware of. And I think they've also got their own agenda in doing so. But of course, that doesn't mean that we can't tactically use that to our own advantage, in trying to repeal the censorship in Europe.
And what would you say, which country in Europe is worse regarding freedom of speech? Because we see a lot of arrests in the UK, for example. France has been at the forefront of the censorship complex. Germany is not great either. Is there a country where freedom of speech is more preserved?
Switzerland.
That's a good question. I mean, I think it's
Italy. Oh, Italy.
Italy is not too bad.
Okay. Italy is not too bad. You have this old tradition of defamation lawsuits lasting forever.
No. I mean, our political system has been very less proactive in pursuing this stuff. But that's, I think, because in a way you could say that Italy, Spain, they have maybe less. I think they've been less the focus of those wanting to control the narrative, because they're seen as sort of secondary countries. I mean, so the focus has been on the European countries. So UK, France, Germany, they're ultimately driving the policy much more than Italy, which has been a very politically marginal country, despite being a big economy for a very long time in Europe, for reasons that we won't go into now. But I think that it's less of a concern to control what people think in Italy than it is to control what people think in France, Germany, and, for example, the UK, because they're much more central in the European decision-making process. And I think, yes, I mean, the situation in the UK and Germany, especially, is just appalling. It's just totally appalling. And it's a different kind of, it's a much more overt censorship than the one that's going on in France. So as we say, France has been very clever at sort of, implementing this kind of oblique censorship, behind the scenes, focusing on social media. Other countries have been, much more open about it, just beating up and arresting people and dragging them off the street simply for holding a placard. But yes, I mean, every country is going at it differently, but, you know, free speech is definitely seriously under threat, you know, all over Europe, in large part because one of the key drivers of this is the European Union itself. And so whatever is decided at the EU level affects, of course, all countries, which is why the Digital Services Act is so dangerous. So Italy, for example, is a passive receiver of EU policies. You know, I mean, you know, they won't proactively pass their own censorship legislation, but they're more than happy to receive the, you know, the censorship legislation coming from the European level. And I think that goes for a lot of countries. So ultimately, I think, you know, that the single biggest threat to free speech today, aside from, you know, what individual governments are doing, remains Brussels, simply because they have such a wide reach. You know, it can immediately influence 400 million people in nearly 30 countries. Yeah.
Yeah. Well, thank you very much, Thomas and Pascal. I will put the link of the report, How France Invented the Censorship Industrial Complex. Very interesting, and you have to read it to understand what is at stake in the cognitive war, basically. Thank you very much, guys.
Welcome.
We'll talk about other issues about the NGO and the EU project, of course, on Le Monde Moderne. And please go and you can see L'éclaireur for Pascal, Unheard for Thomas, and Civilization Works, where you can get this report. And of course, Le Monde Moderne. Follow the independent media and the work we're doing, because this is the only way to get out of the propaganda from the mainstream media. They are dying, but they're still strong, right?
Yeah, way too strong.
Yeah. Thank you, guys. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Alexi. Bye-bye.